congratulations for this first forum. I think it's quite difficult to imagine a better place, a better conference to participate in today around the world. So thanks and congratulations. And sorry for my very poor English, but I will speak in English. It's one of my means to fight imperialism, but sorry to impose you to be the victims of this struggle. Well, with your permission, I will speak about Eurozone this evening, if it's possible. And I completely changed the address in order to switch to be adapted to the panel. Okay. So with your permission. Okay. So today there is a quite high probability that the current crisis will become more acute as a systemic crisis of capital, especially of money capital, since all the conditions of this aggravation of the crisis are there for that to happen. So we are dealing with a systemic multidimensional crisis, as we said, a crisis of which one of the most visible aspects has emerged within the financial sphere because of the current extreme degree of financialization of contemporary capitalism. But for sure, this crisis is also a food crisis, a climate crisis, and an ecology crisis, which are all components of sustainable development. So basically, it can be interpreted in Marxist terms as a crisis of overaccumulation of capital, overaccumulation which manifests itself through an excess of saleable production, mainly because of the extreme concentration of wealth, tending to exclude more and more people from being able to consume, to buy merchandises. And in this context, the agricultural sector, which plays a predominant role in most of the economies of the South, this sector is characterized globally by dysfunctioning and paradoxes extraordinarily serious. First, 3 billion people on the planet are suffering hunger or food deficiencies, while at the same time agricultural production greatly exceeds food needs by at least 50% at the world level. Okay? This reveals also that this is a crisis of overproduction there too, that is to say, even on the agricultural market, and it's completely obvious on the European market, for example. And simultaneously, 3/4 of these people are themselves peasants, okay, of these pools. Besides the extension of lands being put under cultivation at a world level is accompanied by the reduction of the peasants' population vis-à-vis those of the cities, which are absorbing the massive rural exodus in slums, mainly. And an increasing proportion of lands is being cultivated by the transnational, which no longer aim at producing for consumption, but rather for industrial and more for energy outlets, for example, for biofuels. Moreover, in many countries of the South, a relative dynamism in agricultural exports from commercially grown crops coexist with the importation of basic food imports. So there are a lot of paradoxes in this size observed at a world level. And I even suggest to interpret partly without underestimating the extreme complexity of the situation and the diversity of the rising in the Arab Muslim world by the consequences also of this problem. That is to say, this uprising seen as being also related to the complete destruction of the economies of the Arab Muslim countries by capitalism in the very long term, especially by a complete destruction of their agriculture, and especially in the neoliberal form of this destructive capitalism by the rise of the prices of food products, and which created the condition of the social explosion. Okay? So among the effects of the crisis on the south, there is for sure the increase of transfers from the south towards the north through the different channels we all know, from an equal exchange to the repayment of external debt, okay? But many other forms or other channels of transfer from the south. But for sure, the effects of these transfers vary and will vary according to the characteristic of the economy of the south and according to the degree of their integration into the capitalist world system. First, we have the countries that one qualifies as emerging, okay? I don't like this word, but it's simplest to speak about emerging countries. Of course, China is not emerging. China emerged some millennia ago, okay? But it is supposed to emerge very recently, that is to say after Mao's death, more or less. Huh? So, for sure, we have to reject this terminology, but to simplify and to go rapidly, I use emerging countries, okay? In general, the success of these countries is measured in terms of economic growth, and this success has fueled the illusion of a catching up, which could be possible through the methods of capitalism and within the framework of world capitalism as it functions, that is to say, dominated by financial oligopolies. And this gives to the ruling classes in place in these emerging countries, so-called emerging countries, a certain credibility that assured a certain political stability till now. However, differences should be taken into account. China, first of all, China, within this group, has a very peculiar place because of its size, but also because of the success of its industrialization, and at the same time, the successful answer to the key problem, that is to say, the agrarian issue, the agrarian question, okay, with an access to land for the peasants being or having been made possible thanks to the socialist revolution, clearly. Even if, as we seen with Professor Wenjie's address, today the transformation of the Chinese economy leaves open very different and divergent possible evolution and trajectories. The situation of the other continental emerging countries, such as India and Brazil, is completely different from China. I mean, there in India and Brazil, none of the problems that are behind China has found up to now any part of the solution, especially this absolutely fundamental agrarian question. Consequently, and logically, there, the arrogant power of the bourgeois ruling classes, that is to say big capitalists, but also big landowners, landlords, is extremely strong in India, like in Brazil. After and following this group, we have another group of potentially emerging countries, including South Africa, including Turkey, Thailand, and many other countries, but with disadvantages. One is, of course, they are not of continental size, so they cannot negotiate efficiently in front of the greatest powers of the North. But another disadvantage is that they never gave a solution, even partial, to the same problem, to the legacy of the imperialist domination, that is to say, to the agrarian question. Neither in South Africa, nor in Turkey, nor in Thailand, exactly like India or Brazil. But contrary to Vietnam, for example, which is also a candidate for emergence, and to my mind, which has some chances, some possibilities to reach emergence, precisely because and thanks to its heritage of a radical, successful agrarian reform. So which is quite similar to that of China. And we have many other groups, of course, but one is quite interesting, is the group of the country which has truly excluded from the benefits of capitalism at a worldwide scale. Okay? You have most of the countries of sub-Saharan Africa, but you have also in this group Bolivia, you have also Nepal. From the point of view of the imperialism, the interest of these countries comes exclusively from their natural resources, especially lands, for agro-business, for agro-fuel and all that. But of course, the challenges they are facing are of another type. Nothing to see with China or the others. As a conclusion, I don't know exactly what time I have left, but I will conclude simply by saying that, to my mind, another capitalism is not possible, because the history of capitalism in a very long run, okay, began in Western Europe 5 centuries ago, and very briefly said, of course, began with the concentration of land ownership, the expropriation of the poorest peasants, okay, the industrial revolution at the same time for sure, but the inability of the later of the industrial revolution to absorb completely the massive exodus of this expropriated excess manpower, okay? That is to say, the extreme accentuation of the internal contradictions of capitalism in that time, in this place, okay? Which was solved. What was the solution? The solution was the resolution of this internal contradiction, extreme contradiction of the capitalist system, was exporting massively these former expropriated peasants towards the south, okay? By colonization, by imperialism, okay? That is to say, with the exception of France. That is to say, with the exception of the only country in Europe which experienced a revolution. The French peasants stayed because there was an agrarian reform during the revolution, after the revolution. Partial, insufficient, all that, but effective. So they stayed. So, why I'm saying that capitalism is not the way for the thoughts? Because this history of capitalism is not reproducible, is not replicable. Where could the souls export massively its expropriated peasants without access to land? If the souls maintains the refusal, the prohibition of the access to land. Where? To the moon? That's not possible. That's a deadlock. So this history is not replicable. That is to say that the only solution for us is to rebuild alternative and radical proposal on the left in form of socialist transition, of access to land for the peasant, for social progress and a better world for the peasant societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Remy, for sharing with us your reservation and view of the non-replicability